Sarah's hands trembled as she placed the carton of milk back on the shelf, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She never imagined her life would come to this, choosing between medicine for her daughter's fever or the milk the little girl so desperately needed. What she didn't know was that the man watching from the end of the aisle was about to change her life forever, and the reason behind his generosity would leave her speechless. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store buzzed overhead as Sarah counted the crumpled bills in her wallet for the third time. $7.43, that was all she had left until payday, still 3 days away. Her daughter Emma's prescription had cost more than expected, leaving barely enough for essentials. The 4-year-old had been battling a persistent fever, and the doctor's visit had drained what little savings Sarah had managed to set aside. "I'm sorry, sweetie," she whispered to Emma, who sat quietly in the shopping cart, her normally bright eyes dulled by illness. "We'll have to put the milk back today." Emma didn't protest. Even at her young age, she had grown accustomed to hearing those words, "We'll have to put it back." Sarah's heart broke a little more each time she had to say them. As she returned the milk to the refrigerated shelf, Sarah didn't notice the well-dressed man at the end of the aisle, observing her with interest. James Harrington had stopped by the store on a whim, a rare occurrence for someone whose assistant usually handled such mundane tasks. The 52-year-old real estate developer had built an empire worth millions, but something about the young woman's defeated posture caught his attention. James watched as Sarah knelt beside her daughter, whispering something that made the little girl nod bravely. He saw the woman quickly wipe away a tear before standing up straight, squaring her shoulders with a dignity that struck him deeply. There was something hauntingly familiar about her struggle that resonated with him in ways he couldn't immediately understand. As Sarah pushed her cart toward the checkout with the few items she could afford, James made a decision that would set in motion events neither of them could have anticipated. "Excuse me," he called, approaching her with a gentle smile. "I hope you don't mind, but I couldn't help noticing you put back that milk. Would it be all right if I got it for your daughter?" Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. Pride had been her companion through the hardest times, but one look at Emma's pale face changed her mind. "That's very kind," she said softly. "Thank you." But James didn't stop at the milk. "Please," he said, gesturing to her nearly empty cart. "Let me help with your groceries today." Sarah hesitated, suspicion clouding her features. "Why would you do that? You don't even know us." James's answer was simple but would prove to be far more complex than either of them realized at that moment. "Because someone once did the same for my mother and me, a long time ago." What Sarah didn't know was that James had recognized in her the same determination his own mother had shown raising him alone after his father abandoned them. What she couldn't have guessed was that the wealthy businessman standing before her had once been a hungry child, watching his mother return food to the shelves when there wasn't enough money. After paying for a cart full of groceries, James helped Sarah load them into her battered sedan. As Emma thanked him with a shy smile, he handed Sarah his business card. "I own a property management company," he explained. "We're looking for an office assistant. The hours are flexible, and the pay is better than minimum wage. If you're interested, please call me." Sarah stared at the embossed card in disbelief. "I don't understand. Why would you offer me a job? You don't know anything about my qualifications." James smiled. "I know enough. I know you're responsible and resourceful. Those are qualities I value more than a resume full of credentials." What James didn't tell her was that he had been searching for a way to give back meaningfully, beyond the impersonal charity donations that were part of his company's public relations strategy. Something about Sarah's quiet dignity had awakened a purpose in him he hadn't realized he was missing. The next day, Sarah called the number on the card, half expecting it to be a cruel joke. To her surprise, she was immediately connected to James's assistant, who scheduled an interview for the following morning. The Harrington building stood like a gleaming monument to success in the heart of downtown. Sarah, dressed in her only decent outfit, a navy skirt suit she'd purchased secondhand for job interviews, clutched her worn portfolio as she entered the imposing lobby. Emma was spending the day with a neighbor, her fever finally broken after the medicine had done its work. The interview was unlike any Sarah had experienced. James asked few questions about her work history, focusing instead on her life experiences and how she handled challenges. By the end of their conversation, Sarah had a job with a salary that brought tears to her eyes, tears James pretended not to notice to preserve her dignity. What Sarah couldn't have known was that as she left his office that day, James made a phone call that would further alter the course of her life. He contacted the property manager of one of his residential buildings, instructing them to prepare a 2-bedroom apartment for a new tenant at a significantly reduced rent. 2 weeks into her new position, James called Sarah into his office. "How's Emma doing?" he asked, genuinely interested in the little girl who reminded him so much of himself at that age. "Much better," Sarah smiled. "She's back at preschool and loving it." "Good, good," James nodded. "Listen, Sarah, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. One of my properties has a vacancy, and I'd like to offer it to you at a reduced rate. It's in a good school district, and there's a playground right across the street." Sarah's expression hardened. "Mr. Harrington, I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't accept charity." James leaned back in his chair. "It's not charity, Sarah. It's an investment. Having a reliable tenant is valuable to me as a property owner. And frankly, having you live closer to the office benefits me as your employer." His logical explanation softened her resistance, but Sarah still hesitated. "Why are you really doing this?" James was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. Finally, he decided on the truth. "When I was 7 years old, my mother and I were evicted from our apartment. We lived in our car for 3 weeks before a stranger noticed us and offered my mother a job and an affordable place to live. That stranger changed our lives. I promised myself that if I ever had the means, would do the same for someone else." What he didn't tell her was that the memory of those 3 weeks, the hunger, the cold, the shame, still haunted him despite all his success. In helping Sarah and Emma, he was also helping the frightened boy he once was. Sarah accepted the apartment, and over the following months, her life transformed. With stable housing, a good job, and childcare assistance that James arranged through a company program, she was able to enroll in evening classes at the local community college, pursuing the accounting degree she had abandoned when she became pregnant with Emma. James watched her progress with quiet satisfaction, occasionally joining Sarah and Emma for dinner or taking them to the zoo on weekends. He was careful to maintain professional boundaries at work, but outside the office, a friendship developed that enriched all their lives. 6 months after their first meeting in the grocery store, James invited Sarah and Emma to dinner at his home, a sprawling mansion that made Emma's eyes widen with wonder. "Your house is like a castle," the little girl exclaimed, her earlier shyness forgotten as she explored the grand rooms. James laughed. "It is rather big for just one person." As they enjoyed dinner on the terrace overlooking the city lights, Sarah noticed James watching Emma with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "She reminds me of someone," he said, following her gaze. "My sister." "I didn't know you had a sister," Sarah replied, surprised. James's smile faded. "I don't. Not anymore. Leukemia took her when she was 6. I was 10. The revelation stunned Sarah. In all their conversations, James had never mentioned a sister. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. James nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "My mother worked 3 jobs to pay for her treatments. That's why we fell behind on rent. After Lily died, Mom just gave up. She died a year later. The doctors called it pneumonia, but I always believed it was a broken heart." Suddenly, his generosity made even more sense to Sarah. Emma, with her blonde curls and bright spirit, was a reminder of the sister he had lost. In helping them, James was honoring Lily's memory. What Sarah didn't realize was that James had been planning something significant, something that would change not just her life and Emma's, but the lives of countless others. The following week, James called Sarah into his office again. This time, he had a proposal that left her speechless. "I'm establishing a foundation," he explained. "The Lily Harrington Foundation will provide housing assistance, educational scholarships, and healthcare support for single parents and their children. I'd like you to run it." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Me? But I don't have any experience running a foundation." James smiled. "You have the most important qualification, you understand the need firsthand. The rest you can learn. I've watched you these past months, Sarah. You're intelligent, compassionate, and determined. You're exactly who I need for this." The salary he offered was generous enough to take her breath away, but it was the opportunity to help others in her situation that brought tears to her eyes. "Why me?" she asked again, still unable to believe her fortune. James's answer was simple. "Because that day in the grocery store, when you put back the milk, you did it with dignity. You were down, but not defeated. That's the spirit I want this foundation to embody." What he didn't say was how much she had come to mean to him, not romantically, but as family. In Sarah's determination, he saw his mother's strength. In Emma's laughter, he heard echoes of Lily's joy. They had filled an emptiness in his life he hadn't acknowledged until they appeared. 3 years later, the Lily Harrington Foundation had helped over 200 families transition from poverty to stability. Sarah, now with her accounting degree completed, managed a staff of 12 and a multi-million-dollar budget with skill and compassion. Emma, now 7, thrived in school and considered James her honorary uncle. The three of them had formed a family of choice, bound by something stronger than blood, shared purpose and mutual respect. On the anniversary of their chance meeting, James invited Sarah and Emma to dinner at an upscale restaurant. After dessert, he presented Sarah with an envelope. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find the deed to a house, a beautiful 3-bedroom home in a neighborhood she had always admired. "It's yours," James said simply. "Consider it a bonus for your exceptional work with the foundation." Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. "James, I can't accept this. It's too much." James reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, do you know what my net worth is?" She shook her head. "Over $300 million, he said quietly. "And until I met you and Emma, I had no idea what to do with it except make more. You gave my wealth purpose. This house is nothing compared to what you've given me." What James didn't tell her was that he had recently been diagnosed with a heart condition, not immediately life-threatening but a stark reminder of mortality. He had already revised his will, leaving the bulk of his fortune to the foundation, with provisions for Sarah and Emma's future. The house became their home, and the foundation continued to grow. James's health remained stable with medication and lifestyle changes, and he found joy in being part of Sarah and Emma's lives. He attended Emma's school plays, celebrated their achievements, and provided the kind of steady support neither had experienced before. 5 years after their first meeting, as they celebrated Emma's 9th birthday, James watched the confident, happy child blow out her candles and felt a profound sense of peace. The cycle of poverty that had claimed his sister and mother had been broken for Emma. And through the foundation, it was being broken for hundreds of other children. That night, after Emma had gone to bed surrounded by new books and art supplies, Sarah and James sat on the porch swing, enjoying the summer evening. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we hadn't met that day?" Sarah asked. James nodded. "I think about it often. One small decision, stopping at that particular store at that particular time, changed everything." "For us, certainly," Sarah agreed. "But also for all the families the foundation has helped." James smiled. "That's the thing about kindness. It multiplies in ways we can never predict." What neither of them said aloud was how completely they had saved each other, James from a life of wealth without meaning, Sarah and Emma from poverty's grinding limitations. Their chance encounter had rippled outward, touching hundreds of lives through the foundation's work. Years later, when James finally succumbed to his heart condition, he left behind not just his financial legacy but something far more valuable, a model of compassion in action. The foundation continued under Sarah's leadership, expanding its reach nationally. Emma, inspired by James's example, eventually became a pediatrician, specializing in treating children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And Sarah, in addition to running the foundation, became an advocate for policy changes to support single-parent families. The story of how they met, the millionaire and the struggling single mother, became part of the foundation's origin story, shared to inspire donors and recipients alike. But only Sarah knew the full truth of James's motivation, the sister he had lost, the childhood he had endured, and the promise he had made to himself. In the end, it wasn't just about the milk that James bought that day. It was about seeing someone in need and recognizing their humanity. It was about understanding that sometimes, the smallest gesture can be the first step toward profound change. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories that remind us of the difference one person can make. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable.